Well, hello everyone. Good afternoon. Today I come to you with a mini session on one of my favorite topics. It is called the power of compounding. I've talked about this in webcasts before, but I wanted to do something in a standalone session that you could share. Specifically share with your neighbors, with your friends. More importantly, for me, I want to be able to share this with my kids, ultimately with my grandkids. Now, my only grandson is only 14, 15 months old right now, so I may not have this conversation yet, but you kind of catch my drift. Because financial literacy is a thing, and there is power in knowledge and in understanding what small amounts invested can do for you over time. So the question that I'm asking today is, if you invested $5 a day over a long period of time, like 40 years or 45 years or 47 years or even 35 years, could that translate into $1 million or more? And I hope I piqued your interest, because it certainly piqued mine. So let's get right down to business. Let me just change my screen here. So today we're going to talk about the power of compounding. I invite you to follow me on X if you're not doing so already. My X address is BarbArmstrongCS. And, we are going to use an outside resource today, this compound interest calculator. There are many variations out there. This will just be one of them, but know that all investing involves risk, including the loss of principal, and that what I'm going to show you today is based on extrapolating, past history, into the future, and that there is no guarantee that past performance of any security or strategy will, be guaranteed to continue in the future. So that's a really important thing, to keep in mind as we go forward. This is just for example purposes only. So I went out and I typed in compound interest calculator, and our wonderful government has provided us with one under investor.gov. And so if you type in, compound interest calculator, this is just one. There are many out there. But if we scroll down, it says, hey, how much are you going to start with? And let's pretend we're starting with nothing. Okay, because that's where some people are. They say, like, hey, I got enough to maybe, put down first and last month's rent to get my first apartment, if you've got somebody who's just graduating from college. But let's say they can come up with $5 a day. And that $5 a day translates into $152 a month, or $1,825 a year. This actually will come out to $1,824. So, but let's say we are going to make a monthly contribution of $152. That's $5 a day, times an average month of 30 days is 150. And let's say we're starting out, we've got someone who's 20 years old and they're saying, I'd like to retire at 67, or I don't think I'm going to need this money. Even though I may want to retire earlier, I don't think I'll need it until at least that time. So I'm going to give it 47 years to grow. And, and then the next question is, what's your estimated interest rate? And what do we put down for that? So I went out and did a little digging, and I said, okay, what has the S&P 500 returned on average over the last 30 years? So this is average returns. Oh, I guess, I'm thinking I can do this like I'm, working in a PowerPoint, and I can't. Just one sec. Let me erase that. Okay, so we're going to start that again. S&P 500 average returns. Now, over the last 100 years, they actually have 100 years worth of data. It's been 10.06%. Now, if we look at the last 30 years, it's a little lower. It's 9.67. And then the last 15 years is 12.63%. Okay. So if you took and just invested in a mutual fund, in an index, in an ETF, in something that just tracks the S&P 500, these would have been your average returns. Now, what if you said, well, I hear the NASDAQ has on occasion outperformed, like both to the upside and the downside. So if you took and you said, I'm going to take half of it and invest in the S&P, and the other half, I'm going to take and invest in the stocks that are part of the NASDAQ 100. And you can find mutual funds again, or ETFs, or indexes that track the NASDAQ 100. Now, the S&P 500 gives you exposure to 500 different companies, some of the largest companies based in the US. Now, a lot of them have an international footprint, like Apple or Microsoft or Tesla, or, but, they're US based companies. And then with the NASDAQ, it's tech heavy and no financials, but tech has been very strong for the last many years. So that isn't necessarily a bad thing. But over the last 30 years, this index has returned 14.65%. And over the last 20 years, 13. And so I thought, well, what if we take this 30-year number, and I'm just going to take the 30-year number for the S&P, which is the lowest number, so the most conservative, and we'll go with the 30-year number for the NASDAQ, which is, granted a bit higher. And I'm just going to add one to the other, which would give us 24.32. And we're going to divide that by 2. Okay? Divided by 2. We're going to cut it in half. And so that gave me 12.16%. And so we're going to use this as our estimate. Okay, this 12.16%. And if you're wondering where I came up with that number, now you know. Okay, now the last year, the S&P and the NASDAQ last year were both up over 20%. So, these are averages. And then 3 years ago, the NASDAQ was down almost 30 and the S&P was down, I think, 18 or 20. So, we can have big swings. So, there are going to be years where you may be gnashing your teeth, and you have to know that right up front and be willing to stay in for the long game. So we're going to take that average interest rate of 12.16%, that $152 a month, which is $5 a day times 365 days a year, compound it monthly, and what do we get? In 47 years, that $5 a day will translate into $4.4 million. Like, that is kind of mind-blowing, isn't it? But be careful. Because, let's say you hear this and you do nothing with it, and then you start 10 years from now and you end up only investing for 37 years instead of 47 years. Let's see what kind of difference 10 years makes. Our 4.4 million just went down to 1.3. So this, time is huge, my friends. So the sooner that you start, the better off you are. Now, if you're already 35, you might say, geez, is it too late? Well, 35, if you invested for 40 years, till you're 75, that would give you still a tremendous nest egg. And you know what? How many people do you know that are retiring with 1.3 million? There probably are a lot that are not. A lot of boomers, and they're retiring by the millions right now. A lot of them have not started to save for retirement yet. So $5 a day can give you your future self, a lot of choices. There's one other thing I wanted to point out. We're going to go back to our 47 years. And we're going to leave our interest rate the same, except that let's say we're not paying attention and we say, you know what? This thing has a 2% expense ratio, but it tracks the S&P. I'm going to put half in that, half in the NASDAQ. 1 or 2% is not a big whoop. It's a huge whoop. And let me show you how big a whoop it is. So we had at 12.16 over 47 years, 4.4 million. If I take this down by 2%, it's still 10%. It's still an extraordinary return, right? You're going, yeah, it's not that big a deal. 4.4 million goes down to 2. It just got cut in by more than 50%. So watch expense ratios. They are really, really important, my friends. And again, I encourage you to play with this and think like, hey, if I got some money for graduation, if I even started out with $500, would that make much of a difference? Or $1,000? And I had someone that saw this and said, I was wondering what to buy my granddaughter for her graduation. And I showed her this part of your video and then gave her some seed money to get started. And this can make a big difference over time. Like, let's say that was $1,000, which is pretty generous. And so we add $1,000 to the initial investment. Let's go back up to that 12%. So it was going to be 4.4. It now becomes 4.7. So that $1,000 added almost $300,000 to the kitty over time. So guys, that's a wrap for today. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me. I encourage you to share this knowledge with people that you care about. Help us get the word out, because little bits invested over long periods of time, can be amazing and give you amazing choices, for your future self. So I thank you for joining me today. Stay tuned for another mini session coming up soon. Again, this is a third-party tool, investor.gov. I hope you found it helpful. Take care, everyone. Bye for now.